Thanks everyone for joining us for our final International Symposium session of the day. This current session is called All the World's Stage, Teaching Global Arts, and joining us for today's conversation is Megan Lewis, Director of Theater here in the School of Music, Theater and Dance at Colorado State University. Again, thank you for joining us here in the room. Thank you for joining us online. We do ask that everyone please give us feedback through our survey questionnaire activity. We have a QR code for those in the room, and we have a link that folks will receive online. We also will have time for some questions at the end. For those online, if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box in your sort of online portal. And with that,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you for having me and letting me share a little bit about my my wild and wacky adventures in the world as a global arts person. Let me see. Where do I click it there?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
No,
No, that's not it. I'm very sorry.
There we go. That's me. All right. Whoa.
No.
There we go.
Go.
I'm not going to look at that.
I'm trying to get it to go away.
Working.
I'm very, very sorry about that.
So I want to talk today about my experience doing a wide variety of different global teaching things that are around the arts. So at my previous institution, the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, I was part of an initiative to globalize and internationalize the curriculum. So if anyone wants to talk about that, I can do that. I'm not going to spend time on curricular stuff, but that has been something that I have been a huge advocate for. So, and that is particularly true in my field. I'm a theater historian, and theater history tends to be extraordinarily Eurocentric. And does not include the majority of the world. So I've spent a lot of time trying to remedy that. I've also done two, there you go, there's voyage number one, it's my tattoo. I've done two voyages with Semester at Sea in spring 2018 and then in spring 2024. On those voyages, I taught theater classes, film classes, and public speaking as well. And then also I ran my own study abroad, an intensive summer study abroad program called Arts and Culture in South Africa, and took many students there and they had life-changing, transformative experiences. So what I'd like to do today is share some of my lessons from that. And, you know, I often tell people what I think is happening when I'm teaching globally. And particularly what the arts can teach us. But I wanted to make sure that you heard from students. So with their permission, I have student testimonials so that you can hear what they say, because I think that that's far more interesting than what I have to say sometimes. So, oh, there you go, right. Oh, and I also taught at the Edinburgh the Edinburgh Festival. There was a course that my colleague Jenny Spencer and I taught together. So I've done a lot of those things, doing all sorts of stuff like that. I've been a theater historian for 25 plus years now. And as I mentioned, we have a very Eurocentric kind of approach to our field. So I have spent that 25 years trying to bring the world into my classroom, to teach about global theatrical traditions, everything from egungun masquerades in West Africa to No and Kabuki and Bunraku in Japan, or Kathakali in India, or you know, ritual performance in any part of the kind of ancient world. So I've spent my life trying to bring the world into my classroom, but the most delicious thing in the world is being able to take my students to the world, right? That there is something about actually leaving the space of your belly button and the comfort of your well-known world and venturing out into the larger world to not only learn about yourself and about geopolitics and all the big stuff, but also to see what artists do around the world and the way that artists are always speaking to their moment from their cultural perspective, but also sociopolitically and historically as well. So I wrote this piece when I came back from my first voyage in 2018. It was also my sabbatical, so I wrote this piece about it. And I said, I've always dreamed of taking students to see global theater, like this lab that does that, you know? And I said, no matter how hard I've tried to do that, there is absolutely nothing like seeing live kabuki, right? There is nothing like actually physically manipulating a bunraku puppet and realizing how bloody heavy those things are, right? They're 2/3 life size. They take 3 people to manipulate them. And so to have this object, to see this gorgeous object that has been made and passed down through families, and then to watch it thread a needle, it's mind-blowing, right? It's one thing to say, let me tell you about Kathakali, which is this dance drama from India, a Sanskrit dance drama with incredible costumes, and everything has to do with the eye movements and mudras. And it's another thing to sit there and actually watch that experience and understand that even if I don't speak a word of Sanskrit, which by the way I don't, I understood the story because of the gestural language, and that mudras and the eye movements actually gave me an emotional and affective experience. So the students go through all of that, right? So it's one thing to teach the theory, it's a whole other thing to teach the practice. And of course, you know, in my film and social change class, we looked at climate change as a huge thematic piece. And we looked at 3 different films about climate change. And then of course, in my first voyage, it was Hawaii, and this last one was India, but we actually met with climate scientists. We actually were living on a boat, on a ship, where you could see what the rising sea levels were doing every time you came into a port, right? Where we saw the ocean of plastic. When you can actually see those things firsthand and hear from people firsthand, I think it sits and resonates. The learning is far more, it's actually embodied learning, and that's why it stays, right? So I'm going to quickly go through a bunch of things that I believe about what study abroad does, and then I want to talk about what art does as we're doing that, right? So a couple of things. Every one of my students who's ever gone away, whether it was with me or on another kind of study abroad experience, came back with a broader worldview. And I always say the world beyond your belly button, right? Because what we find out there is that we find out that every other human being guaranteed has a belly button. So they all have their stories, and we find this affinity with other human beings. At the same time, everyone has a unique belly button. And so everybody's story is different. So our students get to understand both affinity and diversity in this experience. I'll skip that one for now. So Christina, who came with me, graduate student in my arts and culture in South Africa course, said, my experience in South Africa was an out-of-body yet immersive journey. It's amazing how in spending so much time learning about the narratives of other people, you end up understanding your own narrative better. I will not be able to look at my own country the same way again, right? Oh man, as a teacher, I'm like, check. That is what I want you to learn. Thank you, you are done. She's a rock star. Here we go. Isaiah, another student who came with me. He was a freshman when he came. He said, this has been a life-changing experience. I feel as if I developed as an actor, an artist, and a person. Everyone needs to do this because it will make you vulnerable to change and acceptance. And I know for myself, my eyes were open to another way of living. Right, so broadening our horizons, seeing things as well. Matt, who was also one of the students who came twice with me, he says, after this experience, I'm more willing to put myself in a situation where I might be uncomfortable or where I might find myself in the minority. For a lot of white students going to Africa, you suddenly understand what it feels like to be a person of color in the United States, where you're the only person in the room that isn't like everyone else in the room. So he said, be it racially, religiously, or just physically, I'm beginning to find that these moments of potential discomfort are turning out to be the most edifying. Something I really tried to embody on this trip is your phrase of radical empathy. I found this working best when I was in spaces where I could ask questions to spark conversations, sit back and listen. Oh, Maddie, you're so awesome. There you go. So broadening our horizons. Obviously, going into other cultures means we're going to get an understanding of intercultural communication and understanding and nuance, right? Every port that we go to, I'm always saying to the students, do you know how to say please, hello, thank you, my name is? And if you don't, find out. So that when we get there, you can say, Mingalabar, right? And you can say, goeiedag, right? or molo, or sambonani, or whatever the local phrase is, right? So it's intercultural understanding, but it's also about the tensions that come from that as well, and that's part of what Matt was saying about the discomfort that comes from those moments where you're like, oh, I am in over my head, I'm in a different universe, I don't know what's going on. And that also brings about self-awareness. I hope that you'll see self-awareness in all the student testimonials, because I picked the ones where they were like, I have reflected about something about myself. This is the workshop that I gave on the last voyage in 2024, when everything went a little south on the ship and we had a massive ship-wide issue when the geopolitics of the world came onto the ship, right? So we were dealing with the Israel-Palestine situation. And so I gave a workshop about having sticky, tricky conversations. And so part of what I was saying is that, what if we don't point fingers at each other all the time and stand in this kind of oppositional place? What if we actually have a moment where we can have contact and potentially do something like that, right? Mime, theater person. Okay, student named Megan on semester at sea talked about when we were in Hawaii and learning from Dr. Chip Fletcher, and we also went to the Polynesian Voyaging Society and aboard their wa'a, their sacred canoe, which is a completely organic material canoe that sails around the world, getting signatories from all the island nations that are impacted by rising sea levels. And then they sailed up the Hudson River and presented it at the United Nations, okay? And so Megan says, meeting the folks at the Polynesian Voyaging Society contextualized the climate issues we studied through the Hawaiian concept of mamala, it's actually mamala, but okay, hanoa, stewardship of our island Earth, right? This is a concept, an indigenous concept, that the Earth is actually an island and we have to take care of it. I was really moved hearing from indigenous Hawaiians about their worldview, stories, and the ways they sail using the stars to bring awareness to climate change as an island nation. Jolene, holding a Bunraku puppet here, said, we learned how to communicate with all different types of people. And this helped to develop an understanding of different ways of communication that is important if we are to solve our problems together. And I think one of the things that the students really gained was this understanding of, like, we're a global village. We're not just the little isolated villages that we're in. Sam said, I've gained so much confidence throughout this journey, being able to publicly speak and talk to new people. And that is one of the most important life skills, and one that he's very grateful to learn. That was my public speaking class. Going with a big group of people meant that there were discussions, and in these discussions, I learned to communicate my thoughts on a subject and situate it with the opinions and thoughts of other people, right? So to be engaged in this kind of intercultural conversation. And this is Yuval checking out the candy bars that I recommended in South Africa. Independence, right? For so many students, their first time away from home is college, and then their first time away from home is when they travel outside of home. It's a time of thinking about everything from, like, how you plan your life to responsibility, independence, emotional regulation, risk-taking, you know, all of these things, and just agency. You're understanding that you are an adult member of the human race, and that you can go and do all of these wonderful things together. And that yellow jacketed independent soul was my son. So is still my son, but that's him walking independently away from me, not doing anything with me, right? So Alina said, the independence you gain from traveling abroad can only help you, right? If you've never been away from home, this is a great opportunity. Sometimes you have to leave to know you want to come back. It was her very first time. She was terrified. Her very first time out of the United States was going to Africa. Right, there you go. Philip said, as a young man with a conservative background from a landlocked state, climate change was never relevant to him, right? And he said, because my family has strong ties to the fossil fuel industry, climate change was often, like, dismissed, right? So here he is doing all this deep reflection about what he learned. By sailing the world and seeing the impact of climate change, I now take the stance as an environmentalist. mean, this young man went through a total epiphany. If film is capable of persuading my viewpoint, I realize how film can be used to bring about dramatic changes in the world. So he understood himself as an agent of change, not just someone who was like, oh, I'll follow whatever my family has said. He goes, oh, he came to this deep realization. Rory said, being in Africa gives one an entirely new perspective on Blackness. To be Black in America is to be a foreigner in one's own country. But what is fantastically different about South Africa is that Black Africans can hold onto their culture no matter what, right? After apartheid tried to strip their dignity and all of these things, right? And he really said that he came into his own Blackness by going on this journey. Amazing, man. Tanya said, I learned how a confident, strong woman acts. Yes, I take credit for that. I'm going to take this through my career, but also through my life, right? So students are also watching what we're modeling and how we're doing that, right? Janet said, I learned about the powerful roles and movements that women were a part of. This trip helped me embrace and love my Blackness even more, and it empowered me as a Black woman. So all of these individual students coming to some kind of understanding about themselves and their place in the world, seeing it affirmed, feeling represented in certain ways. Hawaii. Maggie said, meeting with the Voyagers, again, this was the Polynesian Voyagers, gave me a new and more tangible perspective on Hawaii, how Hawaiians feel about climate change. It's really made me pay more attention to my carbon footprint. I'm going to make much more conscious effort to eat locally, rely less on food imported from out of the country. So Maggie really went through an experience of understanding, wow, and this was something that she went through the entire voyage. She was constantly saying to me, look how little the rest of the world gets by on and thrives on. And wow, we have so much and we're so wasteful. And right, so she was also coming to an understanding of herself that way too. So independence. But I think more importantly, interdependence. And I am a huge champion of the African philosophy of Ubuntu and the mutuality of our humanity, that we exist in relation to each other and with each other. And this has to do with community building as well and teamwork. So, I mean, not just in my classes, but in any of the study abroad classes that I witnessed on Semester at Sea, people were doing group projects. They were figuring things out. Yesterday, my colleague Andy had them. He had his economics students do these like McDonald's assessments in all of the ports we went to, and they had to come up with these practical things. And I watched them present, and they were so passionate because several of them were in my public speaking class, so they asked me into that class. So I watched them present, and they were very confident in what they were doing. Right? So this sense of like doing it together. Here are students actually working with water puppets in Vietnam. And man, did they have to coordinate themselves because those things are heavy and clunky and they only go in one direction. So in order to make it look smooth, you really have to work it, right? Casey said, learning at sea showed me the issues of today and how each of us is able to do our part to make the world a better place. Right? This idea of Ubuntu. Hispaniel. He said, it was refreshing to be able to talk about race and the struggles that a person of color can face in an environment that felt so safe. This was the first time in my entire life that I felt like I was part of the theater community. Get emotional about that one. You are a cute, amazing human. Nick, who came with me twice, by the way, said reconciliation. He was really wrestling with this notion of reconciliation in South Africa and how the history of this terrible, horrible colonial history and then apartheid, and then we somehow negotiated our way out of that rather than go into civil war. So he was thinking a lot about the spirit of reconciliation. And he said it's to look another human being in their eyes, face them with sincerity, and offer your heart as a means to bridge the gap created by your histories and identities and wrongs and other elements in life that we have various degrees of control over. Before you can forgive or ask for forgiveness in the hopes of progress, you need the emotional depth of your heart, because without that, human connection is impossible. I love Nick too. He's a great playwright. He's like making things happen. So in terms of kind of like bigger theoretical ideas that I think learning abroad really encourages, one is the idea of plurality. And by that, I mean all these things. I mean things like democracy. What does democracy mean? Right? What does it mean to have a system that is built on checks and balances and making sure that power doesn't wait? We're in a bit of a terrifying moment in history. Yes, okay, but so this notion, the idea that we need to hold multiple truths simultaneously and that to truly be a sophisticated adult means that you are capable of doing all of those things, right? Which means that you can see something, understand it for its terribleness, and understand why people did it, and feel sort of a responsibility, and, right? Instead of this, it has to be black or white, it has to be good versus bad. That there are a range of solutions and perspectives that are possible for any issue and solution. That we embrace tension, and this is something that we as theater artists do, because the very definition of theater is conflict. You have an antagonist and a protagonist, and they do stuff, and then we watch, and that's theater. So at the root of it is that idea. And then, of course, the idea of speaking truth to power. This is particularly true in my film and social change class. I structure that class around documentary films, around each of the ports that we go to. So whatever the major issue is, whether it's human trafficking or racism or environmentalism or what people do in Kenya. We did a wonderful film called Milking the Rhino, which is about the indigenous Maasai people and how they're maintaining the land as tourism at the same time as they're trying to keep their traditional culture alive and intact and sacred, right? We saw An Inconvenient Truth, which is Al Gore's piece about climate change. And of course, Ai Weiwei, when we went the first voyage, we went to China, and he's a dissident artist who likes to make good trouble, like John Lewis said, yeah. This is what Lucas had to say about this idea of plurality. And you can see Lucas is a character. This trip made me look at myself and think of me as a tapestry, a collection of identities and experiences that can't always be distinguished and that form a coherent, always growing whole. All my identities and experiences are sewed together and interact with each other in innumerable ways, shaping and texturing my tapestry over time. This experience in South Africa taught me to look at everything, every opportunity, as having a life-changing potential, as being a chance to add new parts to my never-ending tapestry. On the moment that my teacher heart was like, oh, yes, Lucas. Mike said, studying film and social change through the documentary films that we saw. We were taught various social, economic, environmental, political issues that are very relevant today, like climate change, racism, how media shapes body image, and art as a way to speak truth to power, right? All of these ways. Anna says, these have been the most inspirational and meaningful conversations I've ever had in my life. And now I better understand so many issues from a global perspective. And I will walk away from SAS as a better person because of it. Yeah, Anna Banana, there you go. I love Paul. Paul's a grad student, so there's a little more sophistication to this idea, but let me let you know. Just when I think I've embarked on a confident trajectory of understanding, just when I start patting myself on the back for having figured it out, a moving object, a fact about the past, an experience shared by a friend, a stray comment, comes from outside my field of vision and collides headfirst with my comfortable misconceptions. He wrote an absolutely gorgeous piece called Whiplash about the experience of traveling abroad. I mentioned this at the panel yesterday on Semester at Sea, but ethical tourism is a huge part of what we are concerned with and teach and practice, right? And this is Anu Tarnath. She wrote this beautiful book called Beyond Guilt Trips, Mindful Travel in an Unequal World. And I had the opportunity to be on a panel with her one time. But she's basically saying we need to think about the ethics of travel and the power dynamics and all of those kinds of things as well. And how do we go into cultures as gracious guests rather than obnoxious, whatever, the ugly American, whatever, whatever character we're where it's stereotyped as.
Mhm.
So I wanted to now kind of shift things. Those are the reasons that I think traveling abroad and studying with students are so important. But I really want to talk a little bit about why arts matter and why teaching the arts is so important. So I'm pulling from the World Alliance for Arts Education by Georgina Barton and Margaret Bagley. So there are a couple of things that we as arts educators take for granted, which I sometimes need to say out loud because I assume everyone knows that we teach this, and sometimes people don't. Sometimes people just go, oh, you do something with jazz hands and we don't know what it is, right? Magic. So learning in the arts develops a number of absolutely key faculties, including creative and imaginative thinking, and both divergent and convergent thinking. The ability to understand how parts come together to make a whole. All the different parts of theater make a production that we put on a stage. So we understand that. We also understand how to dismantle it and take it apart, to deconstruct it. We deconstruct texts, we understand how they work. And inherent in drama is conflict. So we're going to find differences of opinion in a divergent thinking. Creativity, which is very, very sought after by all sorts of areas outside of the arts. In most of the literature at the moment about, good leadership and what kind of employees people are looking for, they're asking for creativity, which really means being able to solve problems, thinking critically, communicating, being self-directed. How many times do you see a job that's like, I need you to be someone who just runs your own thing? Hi, love, come on in. Initiative and collaboration, teamwork, right? And all of these are things that we teach in theater in particular. The arts also evokes deep emotional responses. You heard some of those from my students already. And if you wait for any minute now, tears could erupt from my eyes because I have a deep, deep empathetic thing that happens, yes? Especially when I think about my beloved students. And this is related to physical and mental well-being, right? So in the arts, we are emotion forward. And that isn't always the case in other fields. That can sometimes be overwhelming to folks who are not used to that much emoting, but that's kind of what we do too. Art also promotes this idea of social responsibility and intercultural dialogue and cultural diversity, right? So we're drawing from all of these traditions. When I'm teaching theater history and I'm taking people around the world and I'm showing them No, which is an art form in Japan that is incredibly detailed and slow, is masked work and happens in chant, right? Most people, even many contemporary Japanese folk, don't necessarily register it as like, oh, I understand the story and I'm following the plot. Instead, what we're looking for are other moments, like the tiniest head movement that changes the way that actor communicates to us. Or the fact that a mask in Act 1, which is called the Dagon mask, is all about the sublimated energy of the character. And at the scene change in Act 2, there's a brand new mask. This one's called the Hanya mask. It's got horns and a big open mouth. And that is when whatever that sublimated energy is, it comes out in Act 2. So all of these things require people to learn to attend to intercultural nuance or cultural specificity. Like, what does no mean? It means something in Japan, and it isn't necessarily a thing that can just be universalized and translate elsewhere, right? Like Shakespeare, because Shakespeare's been used as a tool of colonialism everywhere. So Shakespeare gets sort of forced down everyone. I guess I should be quiet about my feelings about him. Okay, what else? Perception of relationships between different elements, right? How the parts are related to each other. Nuance, range of solutions. The idea that aims can shift during the process. It is pretty much guaranteed that if you are putting on a piece of theater, something's gonna go wrong at least one point in your procedure, right? It might be that you run out of budget. It may be that a lighting piece suddenly falls from the sky. Please, no, we don't want that ever to happen. It could be that an actor gets ill, right? There's all sorts of things. It could also be that the back of your dress suddenly tears open as you're doing your big musical theater number and somebody behind the stage has to run and duct tape it, right? Like whatever is happening, we know that there can be different aims and we have to keep moving. Kind of like I said yesterday about being on the ship on Semester at Sea. You have to be fluid and willing to keep moving. It's also a world of imagination, right? When we're thinking about what could be. In acting, we call it the magic if. The what if? What if? So built into what we do in performing arts is this land of imagination where we dream up new worlds and potentials and possibilities. And so inherent in that is a way to question existing power structures as well. Different perspectives are encouraged. Any group of people that gets together to do performing arts is going to have a whole series of different skills that they bring to the table, right? A lighting designer does something very different than the costumer, very different than the dramaturg, very different than what the actors are doing. We're all bringing those beautiful skills together in harmony, in a collaborative effort to make something happen. Play with ideas, take risks, push stereotypes, all this stuff, yeah? So there, someone wrote all the things that I believe about my form, and now you get to believe them instead of me. So what does art and theater teach us about things? I am going to quote good old bard Willie Shakespeare. He said, the purpose of playing whose end both at the first and now was and is to hold as it were the mirror up to nature. So art is a way of holding a mirror to our societies. It is true of our home societies. The art that comes out of the United States is doing that, right? At various times in our history, we have had pieces of work that have really risen in the zeitgeist to a point where they are talked about by people who aren't even in the art world, right? Because they are saying something about the culture. Most recently, the musical Hamilton, right? So Hamilton asked us some very big questions about the stakes of representation in this democracy, about whose narrative the history really is about. And what if we did a magic if, which is what Lin-Manuel Miranda did, and he said, hey, I'm gonna take the history of America, that founding father story, and I'm gonna cast all people of color in that role, and let's imagine what America would look like if we told it from that perspective, right? Go back about 40, 50, maybe 56. I don't know how I would know it would be 56 years, but about 56 years ago, a musical called Hair also kind of caused a big uproar, right? Because it was hippies and sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and it was very much about protesting the Vietnam War. You know, so whether it's these kinds of plays or if it's The Crucible, Arthur Miller writing about the Salem witch trials, but really writing about McCarthyism. So we hold a mirror up. The wonderful theater director from Germany, Bertolt Brecht, said, art is not merely a mirror with which to reflect society, but it's a hammer with which to shape it. He's my hero, one of my heroes. Okay, so art is also a window into culture. As I took students around the world to learn about all of these different art forms, not only, I mean, okay, so the ship arrives in a different port. And first thing people figure out is, okay, what's the money? Second thing, what do we eat here? Third, how do we say please and thank you and all of those things? Where do we party? You know, how do we party? What's an appropriate way to party in this place and what isn't? Where should I go and see cultural things? And those students that went to see art also came back with an absolutely rich understanding of the priorities of that culture. So it's culturally grounded storytelling. That is what I think of as global theater. Right? Here, I, for whatever reason, I'm not a puppet expert, but on both of the voyages that I've done with Semester at Sea, I somehow became a puppet person. Because there's such a rich puppetry tradition around the world. So now I have this other feather in my cap that I know how to actually manipulate these things and make them as well. But I didn't know very much about puppets before I sailed. So in Myanmar, we actually participated in a puppet making workshop. Burmese puppets are marionettes. So they're the ones with strings, right? And we watched the Twee family, who have been doing this for generations, carve a puppet from wood. It's this very particular sacred wood. Carve the face, carve the puppet. And because Myanmar is an animist culture, it's Buddhist and animist, because there's a lot of animist traditions, everything is imbued with a spirit, including the puppet, actually including the wood out of which the puppet comes, and it is gendered. And as the puppeteer is carving, that becomes revealed. So the little puppet that we made, that one, it's a boy. I have a picture of to prove it's a little boy, but I didn't think that would be it. Okay. And then we watched them dress it, and then we got to manipulate these things and realize how complicated and hard it is. And then we watched this performance, and when you see experts do it, and the way that these puppets can fly and dance, and also their strings can get caught around each other and then come out. Oh my goodness, it was amazing. In Vietnam, I took my students to practice, first sea and then practice water puppetry. This is an agrarian tradition of puppetry in Vietnam. Because Vietnam is on the delta and floods a lot, and because rice and rice paddies are so central to the culture's well-being and livelihood and sustenance, these puppets are done in water. So there's a little screen that has like little roll down bamboo curtain, and the puppeteers are behind that. Right now the students came out to do this, but they're behind, so you don't see the puppeteers, and these are on rods in the water, right? And they're manipulating them from behind this screen. And they are folkloric stories, not very complicated stories. It's like, the fisherman went and then he got an abundance of fish, right? Or the little mermaids. Oh my God, they were so cute. There's one rod that has 6 puppets, and they all have these little diaphanous wings. So as they come out of the water, it looks like they're like flying little mermaids. Oh my goodness, so awesome. But our students actually had to practice this. This is me trying to manipulate a bunraku puppet in Japan. Those are heavy and stunning. I mean, in terms of the sophistication of puppetry, they're probably at the apex. So in each of these places, we learned about puppetry, but in doing so, we understood what the values and the particular nuances of that culture were. So Jen was talking about South Africa now, but she said she was stunned by the fact that at the time it was only 22 years, South African society has clawed and pulled and wrenched itself out of a broken nationhood to a country that, at least from a visitor's standpoint, seems surprisingly evolved in its healing, instead of the sloth-like pace of racial healing in the United States. I'm in awe of how much social, legal, and artistic work has contributed to this fast-track timetable of social repair. Right? So in watching the theater in South Africa, Jen got to understand about South African culture and where we had come from, the transition we had gone through, and where we were in that contemporary moment. It is also, in the performing arts, it's embodied storytelling. And I think embodied storytelling is riveting. There's a whole bunch of embodied storytelling happening right out there right now. As we watch people move, I mean, we could tell a whole drama, a social drama of what people are doing as they move through space, as they are marked in their bodies with costumes of various kinds, and as dynamics occur, right? So I look at the performance in everyday life, but I also think that this particular art form, theater, its power is in that we get up and tell stories with our bodies and our emotions, sometimes with music, sometimes with choreography, right? Sometimes with serious drama, right? But it is all these various ways, and I tried to give you some images. This is my favorite from Edinburgh. This takes some skill. I just have to tell you, to be able to put your head in a bucket and stand like that, it's some skill. So that's a kind of embodied storytelling. This is Laura Foote's beautiful play Reach, and this is an ensemble that we saw at the National Arts Festival too. So Miguel, who came with me twice too, said, South African theater is so physical. I had always thought of theater as a script experience, but now I've seen bodies tell amazing stories. I want to make theater like this, that moves and makes you think and feel so powerfully. Damn. And he has. He has actually become a filmmaker and an artist and is doing a lot of work in LA, and he was absolutely changed by that mode of storytelling that is so physicalized. That is unique to South Africa in many ways because it comes from the tradition of protest theatre, which had to be on its feet and nimble so that when you got raided by the cops, you could run. And also comes from traditional African storytelling, which is embodied storytelling and has a lot of movement and dance and music and choreography to it. Jerry said, the National Arts Festival is a perfect spot for artists and humans to come together and wrestle with ideas of reclamation and identity in a country that is still in the process of radical economic, political, and social change. It's critical in reflecting the spirit of art in South Africa and reflecting the small acts of determination by artists to reconcile their traumatic history. It's not only embodied storytelling, but I think the best kind of learning is embodied learning. And there's a lot of data about this if you want to kind of do that. I'm not that kind of a person, but there we go. These are my students in Vietnam practicing opera techniques with the artists that we had just seen perform. You know, this is one of those things, shame, I kind of forced them into this and they were like, I hate you, please don't make me do this. In fact, Katie said, I felt afraid when I was called on stage. But then the actors were so kind and made me feel part of the show. I also learned I can dance and do choreography better than I thought. Right? So in certain cases, we are actually physically doing this. We made puppets. I think puppets are coming up at some point. We danced with artists. We actually try out the techniques ourselves, right? We watched Kathakali artists. It takes about 3 hours for them to put all of their elaborate makeup on, right? In Beijing, we actually went behind the scenes to Beijing Opera, and some of the students actually put the whole makeup and everything on, right? So actually embodying this and feeling it in your body is a way of learning too. Similarly, being on the ocean and understanding climate change because you are on the ocean with your body, watching what the ocean does, seeing the plastic, seeing rising water levels. Right? It's very different than just understanding it as a theoretical exercise in an academic environment. Right? Jasmine said, I entered each space engaging with those around me and left feeling more full than before. I learned from our various group discussions that giving yourself space to make mistakes and to play is key to achieving the work that you want to make. No work is ever finished. That's kind of like that idea of tapestry that Lucas says, like I'm this ongoing tapestry that I'm weaving. More embodied learning. Here's some examples. Here's, of course, donning makeup in China. I was just mentioning that. Here's the process of making the marionettes in Myanmar. And I learned firsthand what panda poop is like because we went to the panda center and I spent a day mucking out panda stuff. I don't think they even digest that stuff. I think bamboo goes right through them because it's very fibery what comes out. So here we are doing our hands-on learning, right? So whatever it was that we're doing, it's embodied firsthand experiential learning. And students take that home and they remember those experiences. Not that they don't remember what we teach in other modalities, but this is a particular one that I am strongly in support of. Vishnu said, in my film and social change class was an opportunity to engage with issues facing our world through the lens of film. Not only did I learn to analyze film, but I got to make my own, which was an incredible learning opportunity. I had students do their own mini documentaries. None of them had ever made a film before. And they used some of the most creative techniques ever. One person did it entirely on a cell phone, live, right? So it was a live stream thing. I was like, you are gonna be a filmmaker one day, you need to do that. Other people used PowerPoint. Other people used little versions of like, you know, iMovie. It was amazing though, the stories that they got to tell. So it was hands-on stuff for them, right? Here, Caitlin said, we went backstage and watched the actors get into makeup and then they asked if we wanted to try, so we did. I felt stunning in that costume. I felt like a queen in the most amazing play. Fig learned some Fig's also a grad student, also learned some very embodied experiences as a trans person coming with me. Men take up space. This was part of the most gorgeous analysis I've ever read from a student about a class.
Men take up space. You already knew this, but now you see an enormous phallic structure built on top of the plateau just to reinforce this message. At the Ford Tracker Monument, one of the sites that we visit in South Africa, you feel very small because nothing is bigger than the ego of a man who can come into an already inhabited space and plant his own flag. Nothing is bigger than man spreading across land. Nothing is bigger than man. This became a performance piece that Fig did. It was absolutely stunning. Embodied learning is also sometimes intercultural in its nature, and that's what I think, why I'm such a big fan of Semester at Sea. So in India this year, in spring 24, we partnered with St. Teresa's College in Cochin, which is an all-women's college aimed at business and STEM education for young women. So my students in my film and social change class and the women from St. Teresa's, we all got together. There was this huge panel of climate scientists that came from various institutions in Kerala in the southern part of India. And each of these scientists had a research project that they shared with us, everything from like biofuel and composting toilets and bacteria that eats plastic and some amazing solutions. And of course, how to deal with rising sea level because Kerala is coastal, so I don't know, and all of that was happening. And then we got to do a hands-on experience afterwards where we went to a local beach. And this is how much plastic we picked up in the span of 3 hours. And then the students really reflected on this. So first of all, it was an amazing team building experience. Lots of people like, let's get there. It was also an interesting archaeological experience in terms of what we discovered that washes up. Some stuff really gross and shocking. Other things like sad, like little children's shoes and dolls and strange things. So we made a whole kind of like art installation with all the things that we found. But then also students reflected on the fact that tomorrow morning the tide's going to bring an equal amount of plastic. Right? So what do we do about all this? And then we met a filmmaker who's making a film, or a series actually. He made 6 films about various sites across the entire Indian subcontinent, about various efforts around climate activism. So then they also got to talk to a filmmaker, right? So this was embodied learning. It was practical, it was hands-on, it was relevant, it was about the biggest issue that's facing our planet. And on the bus ride home, a spontaneous dance party broke out between the students from St. Teresa's and my students. And that, I think, probably was my favorite moment of the entire day. Everything else was, I had planned and scripted and we made this happen. But what happened when young people turned on their music and were sharing different styles of music? So some of the girls were like, okay, I like Taylor Swift. And they're like, we do too. And so there'd be like a Taylor moment. And then there would be some Bollywood style stuff. And then other people were like, no, we're gonna do this. And it just, we had a long ride. And I felt sorry for the bus driver because the entire place was like jumping. It was beautiful. And it was about students connecting with each other around both those affinities and the differences. So Harley said, our field class was so amazing. I love learning from climate change activists and the filmmaker. Picking up all that trash in the scorching sun, only knowing that tomorrow there would be as much plastic washed up on the beach, made me realize how big the problem really is. I wouldn't have understood it without cleaning it up myself. Tamara, I was left with questions about myself and who I am, how I'm perceived by others, and what I can do to help better the lives of those around me. You can only lead by example, and Nelson Mandela started small. He started by standing up for rights and by his own interactions with the people around him. I do not foresee being a leader of mass influence, but as an artist, I would love to continue to create works that will spark an idea or change, no matter how small. Community. We give a lot of lip service in theater to building community. And we mean that in multiple, we give lip service, but it's practice as well. And we mean that in multiple ways. When a group of artists comes together to make a play, we create a community. It is a temporary one. That is why at the end of every show, there's a very sad thing called, thank you, I gotcha, post-show blues, right, where people get sad. But we create that space where it's community, where we get to practice and rehearse what the world is going to be like and how we treat each other. And then we create another community when we share the work with an audience and they interact in various ways. Camaraderie, what else we got here? In 2 of the years that I ran arts and culture in South Africa, students took productions. One was a production from Tufts University of Richard III, and the other one was a production of the longest title for a play ever, but it's by Jackie Sibley's Jury, and it's about the Herero genocides, but it's really about race and racism in the United States. It's a play within a play about a bunch of players that are trying to put on a play about the Herero, but then really the tensions start playing out around race lines. It's a stunning, she's brilliant, and it's a stunning piece. So one of the students, Gibson, said, performing Richard III at the prison. So we took this to the local prison in Makanda. It was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. The way the inmates responded and their gratitude that we brought art to them was so powerful to me that we remembered them. So a lot of the inmates said, nobody ever notices and doesn't think that we want art or anything. They just think we're prisoners and we're not supposed to want anything. And they were so moved by that interaction. What else happened here? Sabine was talking about the cast of We Are Proud to Present, the piece about the Herero. That interacting with other artists at the festival was an incredible experience. Americans shut themselves down, but we should open ourselves up to these kinds of larger communities, says Matt. In Semester at Sea in Ghana, there is a long-standing partnership with Fred Benet, who was a Semester at Sea student, who has created the Semenya American School, which is a stunning school. And so students go and work there. They teach in the school. They do whatever work that needs to be done around the school. And it's a 5-day experience where you're actually living with Fred's family in a little place called Sanasi. Right? And so this idea of collaborating, understanding intercultural living, understanding how hot Ghana is, especially in like April, all of those things. Aisha said, this showed me that we are all very similar despite coming from another country. The way Fred teaches kids to be proud of who they are made me so happy. I wish more kids were taught that they can do anything, especially in this world that tells so many kids they are nothing. Creative problem solving. Yes, what else do we have? The whole experience was overwhelming, amazing. We had to raise funds, we had to do the marketing, we had to do it all. But they actually had the experience of bringing a piece of theater and putting it on at the festival and getting reviewed and having audiences, and it was an entire experience for them. I can say deep listening and witnessing as I'm rushing to the end of this, but I think this is also one of the most important things that we as artists make possible, because we can tell stories that ask people to listen for the voice of others and to listen to the nuances of what's going on. So here we have, this is in South Africa at one of the museums that we go to called Lily's Leaf. And this was in Vietnam where we sat and learned, we actually heard stories from a Viet Cong veteran. And that was one of the most meaningful moments for the students, because their understandings of the Vietnam War was so American-centric. To understand it from the perspective of Vietnamese was a very different thing. As I mentioned, having sticky, tricky conversations, sometimes we have to do those, and that is something that I think good artists are really adept at. We don't shy away from having those tough conversations, and we like to facilitate post-show discussions, right? Where people say, like, what did you feel? What did that make you think? Do you want to have a conversation about it? What can we do to do things differently? So that it's not just that, oh, thank you very much, you've seen our production and you exit, but that you actually get to continue the conversation, and that we are catalysts for discussion. I believe fundamentally that theater is a way of building community, and it is a way of imagining and reimagining the world, both in our rehearsal spaces, but also in our classrooms, and then in the larger world as we go out and practice that. Right? Augusto Boal said, theater is not the revolution, it's the rehearsal for the revolution. So I don't know what that is. That's something to do with Hamilton, and there we go. Thank you. I'll take questions. Yes, love.
Not so much a question, but a comment. I just want to say I'm really struck and delighted on the respect and care and champion that you seem to carry for your student genuinely. And I think all of our students on campus need that from their faculty. And I just so appreciate that you are that for them.
I think teaching is a calling. So-
I can tell that you do that. I think
Oh,
that's
and see, here
fabulous.
comes the empathy. The empathy is coming out of my eyeballs now. Thank you for saying that. Yes, love.
More kudos from online. It says, bravo, Meg.
Yay! Must be one of my students. Yes, love.
I'm also an artist at the Kennedy Center. We have worked together in the past, and one of my favorite things was, a lot of the traveling that I've done after that was realizing just how much overlap there is, like cultural exchange and the arts do so many of the same things. And I know you're from South Africa, but I guess I'm wondering in your teaching career, when and how you realized the significance of that overlap, and that story is just, I'm just curious about it.
Well, the overlap, and it's so interesting because that's something that I talk to my students all the time. I say, I chose theater as a discipline. And I'm a historian, but I chose theater to be a historian in because I get to do all human things, right? I mean, in studying theater history, you are looking at politics and science and economics and psychology and, environment and aesthetics and all of these things, right? So first of all, I chose this field because it's an art form that is so tied up with being human that it allows me to do all these other things, which means I never get bored. I'm not just going, okay, I'm just looking at this one thing. I go, oh, I have to learn the socio-political history of Vietnam now. Okay, because I'm going to learn about these puppets, right? So there's that. And also the moment that I think is absolutely delicious for students is those, usually in my arts and culture in South Africa class, it's on day 3. And it's when the students suddenly, they're jet lagged and I have just thrown them into like museums and here's apartheid and let's do all of this stuff and eat more meat than you could possibly imagine because we're a carnivorous culture, and they're going, whoa, what's going on? And then they suddenly go, oh my goodness, all these things are coming together for me. I'm seeing the connections between the United States and South Africa. I'm seeing the differences. For the students of color, they come to me on day 3 weeping. I've never been in a place where everybody looks like me. The white students come to me on day 3, sometimes weeping, but sometimes just more like shell shock. I've never been in a place where not everyone looks like me, right? So in those moments where these beautiful affinities come together and people are connecting the dots and tying it together, that for me as a student, when I was a student, that was hard. I'm like such a nerd there. I was like, the things are all connecting. I'm looking at Spanish and I understand the language, and then I understand Spanish Golden Age theater, and then I understand politics and, oh my goodness, and colonialism and right, all of those things. So when students have an opportunity to immerse themselves by going abroad to see this, it's when all those synapses fire.
The best aha moments ever. Yeah.
And sometimes those aha moments are really difficult ones. It's not always happy. Right? Sometimes we see a play that we've seen some intense plays where students have just been devastated. But then, of course, what we do is we do the holding of one another and the community and the repair and the processing. Yes, we just saw this really difficult thing. Oh, we just saw this atrocious thing. Sometimes we think things are awful. And they're bad, and they're like offensively bad. They're doing things the wrong way, and they go, ooh, let's look at that and figure out why that's so terrible.
Wow, well.
Thank you.
You've inspired us to say thank you to you as well too. So please fill out the survey. Thank you, everyone, and join me in thanking them as well too.
Huzzah. There we go.